I never imagined that the sharpest betrayal of my life would come wrapped in a Christmas demand. One sentence was all it took to fracture everything I believed about love, family, and sacrifice. Buy the car or do not show up. In that moment, I realized my worth had been reduced to a price tag, and years of quiet giving meant nothing without obedience. The pain was not loud, but it was permanent, the kind that settles deep and forces you to question who you are to the people you love most. That was the night everything began to unravel. Before we step into today's story, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're joining us from. We are always amazed by how these stories connect people across different places and experiences. Your voice in the comments keeps this community alive, so do not hold back. And if you are new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you will always be the first to catch our latest stories. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready for a journey that might just change the way you see things. Let's dive in. My name is Eleanor Whitman, and I am 67 years old. I live alone in a small, weathered house on a quiet street in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of place where mornings arrive slowly and the air always smells faintly of pine. This house has known me for most of my adult life. It held my marriage, my motherhood, and eventually my grief. After my husband passed away, it became a place of echoes, but also a place of survival. I stayed because leaving felt like losing him all over again. Before retirement, I worked for more than 3 decades as a hospital secretary. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, and I was proud of it. I knew the rhythms of the place, the quiet urgency of hallways, the weight of responsibility that comes with keeping other people's lives organized. When I retired, I did so without ceremony, carrying home a cardboard box of photos and handwritten notes. Now my income comes from my pension and Social Security, a little over $2,000 a month. It is not much, but it is enough if I am careful. I pay my bills on time. I buy what I need. I do not owe anyone anything, and that has always mattered to me. I was married to my husband for 41 years. We planned to grow old together, to travel a little, to sit on this porch and complain about our knees. Instead, I learned how quickly life can narrow. When he died, I had to learn how to exist as a single woman again, not just a wife. I learned how to sleep alone, how to make decisions without asking anyone, and how to sit with silence. Some days were harder than others, but I managed. I always had. I raised my daughter Rachel with the belief that love meant giving without hesitation. She is my only child, and when she was young, she was bright and restless, always reaching for more. I encouraged that. I believed that if I supported her enough, she would find her footing. When her marriage fell apart years later, I felt that old instinct rise again. A mother steps in, a mother helps. That is what I had always done. Rachel moved back closer to me with her daughter, Lily, who was barely a teenager then. Lily was different from her mother, quieter, observant. She watched the world more than she spoke to it. From the beginning, I felt a pull toward her that surprised me. Perhaps it was because I saw how much she carried already. Or perhaps it was because she reminded me of myself at that age, careful and eager to please. When Rachel told me they needed a fresh start, I did not ask questions. I did not set conditions. I told myself that families do not keep score. I believed that my role was to be steady, to provide what stability I could. Let them come for Sunday dinners. Let them know there was always a place they could land. At the time, my life felt simple, predictable. I had my routines, my careful budget, my quiet evenings. I believed I understood the shape of my days and the limits of my responsibilities. I believed that everything important was already behind me and that what lay ahead would be calm. I did not know then that this sense of peace was fragile. I did not see that my generosity had quietly become an expectation, or that my silence had been mistaken for consent. I thought I knew my life. I thought I knew my family. I did not yet understand how easily love can be turned into leverage when boundaries are never drawn. If you're still watching and starting to sense that something feels off beneath the surface, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. What seemed like love and generosity was only the beginning. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. When Rachel and Lily first began spending more time near my home, nothing felt unusual. At least, nothing I was willing to name. Their visits started as casual drop-ins, the kind families make when they are rebuilding. Sunday afternoons turned into weeknight dinners. A few hours became whole evenings. I told myself this was closeness returning, not dependence forming. I enjoyed having voices in the house again, even when the conversations felt strained. Silence, after all, can make you grateful for noise, even uneasy noise. The first requests were small and came wrapped in embarrassment. Rachel mentioned that the electric bill had jumped unexpectedly, that the cost of groceries had gotten out of hand. I offered to help without thinking twice. I had lived long enough to know that life can tilt suddenly, and I remembered how many times my own parents had stepped in for me. I told myself this was temporary. A bridge, not a pattern. A mother's role is to steady things when they wobble. Over the following months, the requests grew more frequent, though never urgent enough to feel like a crisis. Money for school supplies, money for car repairs that could not wait, money for tutoring Lily might need if she wanted to stay competitive. Each time I reached for my checkbook with a familiar mix of concern and resolve. I told myself I was fortunate that I could help at all. Many mothers could not. Yet small details began to tug at me, quietly but persistently. Rachel arrived one afternoon with a new smartphone, its screen gleaming when she set it on the table. Another time, she carried a handbag I recognized from a shop downtown that I never entered because the prices made me uncomfortable. She talked about being exhausted, about having no money left at the end of the month. But she also mentioned weekend trips and dinners out with friends. I noticed these things, then dismissed them just as quickly. I told myself appearances could be deceiving. I told myself not to be suspicious of my own child. Lily, however, was harder to ignore. She changed in ways that had nothing to do with fashion or taste. She spoke less when her mother was around, answering questions with careful pauses, as if measuring every word. She lingered at my house after dinner, offering to help with dishes she did not need to wash. When Rachel called her phone, Lily's shoulders tensed before she answered. I asked once if everything was all right, and she nodded too quickly. I accepted that nod because it was easier than pressing. Once, a neighbor made an offhand comment about seeing Rachel at a restaurant I knew I could not afford. The remark irritated me more than it should have. I defended my daughter immediately, felt a flush of loyalty rise in my chest. People are quick to judge, I thought. They never know the full story. In that moment, protecting Rachel felt more important than examining the discomfort settling quietly inside me. Still, my body reacted before my mind did. I felt a flicker of anxiety each time my phone rang. I began bracing myself before Rachel's visits, straightening the house as if preparing for inspection rather than company. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations, wondering why I felt tired in a way rest could not fix. I told myself it was age or stress or grief resurfacing, anything but the truth. Looking back now, I understand that the signs were not subtle. They were simply inconvenient. I saw them, lined up one after another, and chose not to connect them. I believed that if I gave enough, things would settle. That love, applied generously, could smooth over any rough edge. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself this was what mothers did. If you're still here, and you've noticed the warning signs quietly stacking up, comment number 2 below. What I ignored for too long was about to explode into something I could no longer deny. Let's move on to Chapter 3. December arrived quietly that year, the way it always had in Asheville. The air turned sharp in the mornings, and I brought out the same box of decorations I had used since my husband was alive. I did not decorate much anymore, just enough to remind myself that tradition still mattered. A wreath on the door, a small tree by the window. I found myself thinking less about gifts and more about the simple comfort of having Lily at my table on Christmas Eve. That was what I looked forward to most. Rachel came over one afternoon, a little more than a week before Christmas. There was nothing warm or casual about her visit. She did not linger in the doorway or comment on the decorations. She walked straight into the living room as if she had rehearsed what she was about to say. Lily followed behind her, quiet, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. I noticed immediately that my granddaughter did not sit down. She stood near the hallway, eyes lowered, as if she wanted to disappear. Rachel did not ease into the conversation. She told me that Lily needed a car. Not someday, but now. She spoke as if the decision had already been made, and I was simply being informed of my role in it. The car had to be new, or close enough to new that it did not matter. It had to be reliable, safe, and appropriate for a young woman with her whole future ahead of her. She framed it as a necessity, not a want, and she spoke with a certainty that left no room for discussion. I listened, nodding out of habit, while my mind raced ahead to numbers I knew too well. My monthly income, my fixed expenses, the careful balance I had maintained for years. When I tried to explain that I could not afford something like that, I kept my voice calm. I suggested alternatives, a used car, helping with insurance instead, something reasonable. I believed, foolishly, that practicality would be enough. Rachel's expression hardened. She accused me of not caring about Lily's future. She said I was always willing to help until it came time to do something that really mattered. Her words felt sharp, but what followed was worse. She told me flatly that if I did not buy the car, I should not bother coming to their house for Christmas. There was no anger in her tone, only finality, as if she were stating a rule rather than making a threat. For a moment, I could not speak. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I had spent my life believing that family was unconditional, that love was not something you earned with purchases. Now, I was being told that my place in my granddaughter's life depended on a transaction I could not make. Lily stood behind her mother, tears sliding silently down her face. She did not look at me, and that hurt more than the ultimatum itself. After they left, the house fell into an unnatural quiet. The door closed, and I stood where I was, staring at the space they had occupied. I felt no anger yet, only a deep, hollow shock. I sat down in my chair and tried to make sense of what had just happened. I replayed the conversation again and again, searching for the moment where I might have misunderstood, but there was nothing unclear about it. I thought about every sacrifice I had made as a mother, every time I had gone without so my child could have more. I had never imagined that one day I would be asked to prove my love with something I could not afford. That afternoon, something shifted inside me. I did not yet know what I would do, only that Christmas had been stripped of its innocence. What Rachel had given me was not a request. It was a test of control, and I had failed it simply by telling the truth. If you're still watching, and that Christmas ultimatum hits you as hard as it hit me, comment number 3 below. What came next wasn't anger yet. It was denial. And that might have been the most dangerous part. Let's continue with Chapter 4. The days after Rachel's ultimatum felt strangely unreal, as if I were moving through my own house as a guest rather than its owner. The Christmas decorations I had put up only a week earlier now seemed out of place. The wreath on the door looked like a costume I had forgotten to take off. I moved through my routines more slowly, distracted by the thought that I might spend Christmas without Lily, not because of distance or illness, but because I had failed to meet a price. I told myself that I could still fix this. I had always believed that conflicts softened if you approached them with patience and humility. So I waited a day, then another, letting my initial shock settle into something more manageable. When I finally called Rachel, I kept my voice calm and careful. I did not mention how deeply her words had cut me. I spoke instead about numbers, about reality, about what I could reasonably offer. I explained my income again, the way I balanced every expense, the limits I lived within. I thought if I laid it all out plainly, she would understand. She did not. Every alternative I suggested was dismissed almost immediately. Used cars were unsafe. Payment plans were irresponsible. Anything short of what she wanted was framed as a lack of commitment. The conversation left me drained, not because of what was said, but because of how little space there was for my perspective. I ended the call feeling as though I had failed some invisible test. Over the next few days, Rachel reached out repeatedly. Messages arrived at odd hours, each one circling back to the same point. Lily needed this. I was the only one who could make it happen. If I loved my granddaughter, I would find a way. The repetition wore me down. I caught myself rereading her words late at night, searching for a version of them that sounded less final, less conditional. I wanted to believe that if I explained myself one more time, something would shift. Instead, doubt turned inward. I began to question my own judgment. Had I become too rigid? Too attached to numbers and plans? I had lived frugally for so long that generosity now felt like a risk rather than a virtue. I wondered if that made me small-minded. I wondered if this was what people meant when they said age makes you afraid of change. These thoughts unsettled me more than Rachel's anger ever could. I thought about Lily constantly. I replayed the image of her standing behind her mother, silent and tearful. I imagined her disappointment, her confusion. The idea that she might believe I had chosen money over her was unbearable. That fear kept me trying, even as each attempt at reconciliation left me more exhausted than the last. At the same time, something subtle began to shift. I noticed how tense I felt before answering my phone, how my stomach tightened whenever Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Helping had once given me a sense of purpose. Now it filled me with dread. I told myself this was just stress, just the pressure of the season. Christmas, after all, brings out strong emotions in everyone. Still, a quiet question began to surface beneath my efforts. If love was meant to be unconditional, why did it feel like I was being asked to earn my place? I pushed that thought away as soon as it appeared. Mothers do not keep score. Mothers do not walk away. I had built my identity around those beliefs, and I was not ready to examine what might happen if they were wrong. By the end of that week, I was emotionally worn thin. I had done everything I knew how to do to smooth things over, to offer compromise without surrendering my stability. Nothing had changed. The distance between Rachel and me felt wider, not narrower, and the weight of it pressed down on my chest. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that some breaks cannot be mended by giving more. Some cracks only deepen when you lean into them. If you're still with me and you've ever tried to fix something that was already breaking you, comment number 4 below, because what I discovered next changed everything I thought I knew. Let's move on to chapter 5. I did not sleep the night after my last conversation with Rachel. Her words kept circling in my head, not loud or angry anymore, but persistent, like a dull ache you cannot ignore. I lay awake listening to the house settle, the same sounds I had heard for years, and realized that my unease had nothing to do with Christmas. It had everything to do with the feeling that I was being pushed into a corner without fully understanding how I had gotten there. Sometime after midnight, I got out of bed and went into the kitchen. I made a cup of tea I did not drink and sat at the table where I usually sorted mail and grocery lists. That night, instead of pushing the anxiety away, I decided to look at it directly. I pulled out my bank statements, both paper copies and the online records I rarely checked beyond confirming balances. I told myself I was not looking to prove anything. I just wanted clarity. At first, the numbers seemed ordinary. A few $100s here, another few hundred there. Payments that had felt manageable at the time because they were spread out and always explained as necessary. I went line by line, highlighting every transfer, every check written to Rachel over the past 18 months. As I worked, a pattern emerged that I had never allowed myself to see. The requests had not been random. They had been steady, increasing in time closely enough that there was never a full recovery period between them. I started adding everything together. Money for utilities, money for school-related expenses, money for car repairs, then more money for follow-up repairs. Each amount on its own had seemed small, almost forgettable. Together, they formed a number that made my breath catch. I recalculated twice, convinced I had made a mistake. The total did not change. I had given Rachel more than $14,000 since her return, all while living on a fixed income that barely allowed for emergencies. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For the first time, I compared that total to my monthly income instead of isolating each request. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. I had been subsidizing someone else's lifestyle at the expense of my own security. The realization was not explosive. It was quiet, heavy, and deeply unsettling. I opened my laptop and began searching for information I never imagined would apply to me. Articles about older adults being pressured by family members, stories about financial manipulation disguised as need. The descriptions were uncomfortably precise, escalating demands, guilt framed as love, threats of withdrawal when money stops. Each line felt like it had been pulled from my own life. What I had treated as a series of unfortunate conversations was, in fact, a pattern with a name. Reading that did not make me angry right away. It made me cold. A kind of clarity settled in that pushed aside months of self-doubt. I was not failing as a mother. I was responding to pressure designed to make me feel that way. That distinction mattered more than I could have imagined. As the night stretched on, my thoughts turned to Lily. I replayed moments I had brushed aside before. Her hesitation, her discomfort, the way her presence was often invoked as justification for money that never seemed to reach her. I began to suspect that she was not just a silent witness to what was happening, but part of the mechanism itself, used without her consent. When dawn finally broke, I closed the folder of statements and sat quietly, letting the morning light fill the room. I knew then that I could not return to the version of myself who avoided the truth for the sake of peace. The numbers had stripped away my excuses and my fear. They had spoken clearly, and once I heard them, there was no unhearing what they said. Silence was no longer an option. The morning after I finally faced the numbers, I woke up feeling older and clearer at the same time. My body was heavy from a sleepless night, but my mind was unusually steady. The confusion that had followed me for months was gone. In its place was a simple understanding that frightened me more than uncertainty ever had. Knowing the truth meant I could no longer pretend nothing needed to change. As I went through my usual routine, I noticed how different everything felt. The house was the same, the street outside just as quiet, yet I moved through the morning with a sense of resolve I had not felt in years. I realized that what had kept me silent for so long was not generosity or patience. It was fear. Fear of losing access to Lily. Fear of being shut out of my own family. Rachel had not created that fear, but she had learned how to use it. That afternoon, Lily came by after school. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with homework. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had counted numbers the night before. I watched her closely, noticing how she hesitated before speaking, how she seemed to weigh every word. When she finally looked up at me, I understood that whatever she was carrying had been growing heavier for some time. She told me, quietly and carefully, that her mother often asked her to message me when money was needed. She said she was told to emphasize how important it was, how disappointed I would be if I said no. As she spoke, her voice stayed even, but her hands twisted together in her lap. Listening to her, I felt a slow ache spread through my chest. Lily was not a bystander. She was being placed between us, turned into a conduit for pressure she never should have carried. I did not interrupt her. I did not offer reassurance right away. I listened until she had said everything she needed to say. When she finished, I understood something with painful clarity. Every time I had given in to keep the peace, I had unknowingly reinforced a system that was harming both of us. My silence had not protected Lily. It had trapped her. After she left, I sat alone and considered the choice in front of me. I could continue doing what I had always done, sending money whenever it was demanded, hoping it would buy stability and closeness, or I could stop, knowing full well that doing so would provoke anger and retaliation. One path promised temporary calm at the cost of my security and Lily's well-being. The other offered uncertainty, but also the possibility of something healthier. For the first time, I allowed myself to question the belief that had guided me all my life. Love did not have to mean surrender. Being a mother did not require me to erase myself. I could care deeply and still say no. I could protect my granddaughter without sacrificing my dignity. That realization did not come with relief right away. It came with a tightness in my chest and a steady awareness that there would be consequences. That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I would no longer provide money without boundaries. I would not allow fear to dictate my actions. I did not announce this to anyone. I did not rehearse speeches or prepare arguments. I simply acknowledged it to myself, sitting quietly in the living room as daylight faded. I knew Rachel would not accept this easily. I knew she would push harder, accuse me of cruelty, threaten distance. But I also knew that continuing as I had been was no longer an option. The choice had already been made by the truth I could not ignore. I did not know exactly what would happen next. I only knew that I was done retreating, and that whatever came after would have to be faced head on. If you're still watching and felt the weight of that decision with me, comment number 6 below. Setting boundaries came at a cost, and the consequences arrived fast. Let's move forward into Chapter 7. For the first few days after I decided to stop providing money without limits, there was an unexpected quiet. No messages, no calls, no sudden emergencies that needed immediate attention. The silence felt unnatural, like the pause before a storm. I tried to convince myself that perhaps Rachel had accepted my decision, that maybe she was taking time to cool off, but my body knew better. I slept lightly, waking at the smallest sounds, waiting for what I sensed was inevitable. The first message arrived late one evening. It was short, clipped, and unmistakably sharp. Rachel wanted to know what had changed. She asked if someone had been filling my head with ideas. The tone quickly shifted from confusion to accusation. By the time the second message came through, the space between them barely minutes apart, the underlying anger was impossible to miss. She wrote as if my decision were a personal betrayal rather than a boundary. Over the next day, the messages multiplied. Each one carried a familiar weight, reminding me of everything she believed she was owed. She listed the sacrifices she had made as a single mother, the stress she lived under, the responsibilities she carried alone. Lily's name appeared repeatedly, woven into every complaint, every demand. The implication was clear. If Lily suffered, it would be because of me. Reading those words, I felt the old instinct stir, the urge to fix, to soften, to give in, just to make the tension stop. But something had changed. The guilt still landed, but it did not take root the way it once had. I could see the pattern now. Each message was less about need and more about regaining control. The escalation itself became proof. Rachel was not responding to hardship. She was responding to resistance. Not long after, I began hearing from others. A distant relative asked if everything was all right, their concern wrapped in polite uncertainty. A neighbor mentioned that Rachel seemed to be under a lot of stress and that she worried about me being alone. The story Rachel was telling had taken on a shape that cast her as the overwhelmed daughter and me as the stubborn, possibly declining mother. It stung to realize how quickly my character could be rewritten once I stopped playing my assigned role. The sense of betrayal ran deeper than I expected. It was one thing to be pressured behind closed doors. It was another to be quietly undermined in public. Yet even as anger surfaced, it was tempered by clarity. This was not new behavior. It was simply more visible now that I had stepped out of line. My greatest concern, however, remained Lily. I worried about what was happening in the space I could not see. I imagined the tension at home, the way my refusal might be framed to her as abandonment or punishment. The thought that she might be made to feel responsible for the conflict sat heavily with me. Protecting her had been part of my decision, but I was beginning to understand that intention alone was not enough. As the days passed, I noticed how differently I was responding. I did not rush to explain myself. I did not defend every accusation. Instead, I read the messages once, then set my phone down. The anxiety was still there, but it no longer dictated my actions. I was beginning to see that maintaining a boundary meant tolerating discomfort, both mine and theirs. By the end of the week, it became clear that willpower alone would not be sufficient. Rachel was determined to push until something gave. The pressure was not going to ease on its own. Sitting alone in my living room one evening, I acknowledged a truth I had been avoiding. If I wanted to protect myself and Lily, I would need more than resolve. I would need structure, support, and safeguards beyond what love could provide. The situation had moved beyond family disagreement. It had become something that required reinforcement from the outside. By the time I accepted that I could not manage the situation on my own, I was more tired than afraid. The constant tension had seeped into every corner of my life. I found myself checking the locks more often, reading messages twice before responding, and rehearsing explanations in my head that I never actually delivered. What unsettled me most was not Rachel's anger, but the realization that my sense of safety had quietly eroded. Love alone was no longer enough to protect what mattered. Admitting that felt like failure at first. I had always prided myself on handling problems privately, without drawing attention or asking for favors. I came from a generation that valued endurance, but endurance, I was learning, could become a liability when it kept you isolated. The boundary I had set needed reinforcement, something firmer than resolve. I began with the most practical step. I went to my bank and asked to review my accounts in detail. Sitting across from the advisor, I felt exposed in a way I had not expected. Saying things out loud made them real. The repeated transfers, the pressure, the fear of retaliation. I half expected skepticism, but instead I was met with quiet concern. The advisor explained options for additional security, ways to ensure that no one could access my finances without my explicit consent. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small measure of relief. There were systems in place to protect people like me. I just had to use them. From there, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in issues affecting older adults. Walking into that office was intimidating. I worried I was overreacting, that I would be told this was simply a family disagreement blown out of proportion. Instead, the language she used was precise and unsettling. What I described had a name: financial exploitation, emotional manipulation. Hearing those words applied to my own life made my stomach tighten, but it also brought clarity. I was not imagining the pattern. I was living inside it. Together, we discussed practical steps, documenting communication, saving messages, keeping records of every interaction. None of it was dramatic or confrontational. It was methodical, protective. The lawyer emphasized that preparation did not mean escalation, it meant readiness. I left her office feeling steadier than I had in months, grounded by the knowledge that there was a framework for what I was experiencing. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and organized everything: statements, notes, dates. As I worked, my thoughts returned again and again to Lily. Seeing the situation through a legal lens forced me to confront a difficult truth. Comforting her was not enough. Shielding her emotionally, while important, did not address the environment she was navigating daily. If I wanted to help her in a meaningful way, I needed to think beyond reassurance. The fear did not disappear. I still worried about how Rachel would react if she sensed I was preparing defenses. I worried about being labeled difficult or dramatic. Those doubts lingered, but they no longer controlled me. I reminded myself that taking precautions was not an act of aggression. It was an act of care, both for myself and for my granddaughter. By the end of the week, I felt something shift inside me. I was still anxious, still uncertain about what lay ahead, but I was no longer drifting. I had direction. I had support. Naming the problem had stripped it of some of its power. For the first time since Christmas, I believed that there might be a way forward that did not require me to sacrifice myself to keep the peace. If you're still here and you feel the shift as the truth finally takes shape, comment number 8 below. What happens next brings the story to its final turning point. Let's move toward the conclusion. The day everything finally came to a head did not feel dramatic in the way I once imagined moments like that would. There was no rush of adrenaline, no sense of triumph or collapse. Instead, there was a quiet heaviness, the kind that settles in when you know there is no turning back. I woke up early that morning, dressed carefully, and reminded myself to breathe. Whatever happened next would shape the rest of our lives. Lily stood beside me with a calm that surprised me. She was nervous, of course, but there was a steadiness in her that had not been there before. When she spoke about where she wanted to live, she did so without accusation or anger. She talked about needing stability, about wanting a place where she could focus on school and feel safe. Listening to her, I realized how much she had grown through all of this. She was no longer the quiet child standing behind her mother. She was speaking for herself. Rachel reacted exactly as I had feared and expected. She denied everything, insisting that I had exaggerated, that I had misunderstood her intentions. She framed my actions as betrayal, painted herself as the one being punished for asking for help. Watching her unravel was painful in a way I had not anticipated. This was my daughter, and yet I barely recognized her. The distance between who she was and who I had believed her to be felt impossibly wide. The process itself was exhausting. There were documents, timelines, and questions that forced me to revisit moments I would rather have left behind. But there was also a sense of order to it all. Facts mattered. Patterns mattered. The truth did not have to be defended emotionally. It simply had to be shown. When the decision was finally made, it arrived without ceremony. Lily would live with me. Financial responsibility would be addressed. Boundaries would be enforced. I felt no urge to celebrate. What I felt instead was relief so deep it left me weak. The constant vigilance, the fear of retaliation, the doubt that had followed me for months began to loosen their grip. Afterward, Lily and I sat together in my car before driving home. We did not say much. There was nothing left to explain. In that quiet space, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Safety. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's mood, but the solid kind that comes from clarity. Rachel did not come home with us. She left that day and slowly withdrew from our daily lives. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no reconciliation speeches, just absence. It was a loss, and I allowed myself to grieve it, even as I accepted that it was necessary. That evening, as Lily unpacked her things into the spare room, I stood in the hallway and watched. The house felt different, not perfect, not healed, but honest. Everything had changed, not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Time did not rush back into my life after everything settled. It returned slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether it was safe to move forward again. The days became quieter in a way that felt earned rather than empty. I no longer woke with a knot in my stomach or scanned my phone for messages that might pull me back into chaos. The calm I feel now is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of a clarity. Living with Lily has changed me in ways I did not expect. She found her footing once the tension lifted, and I learned to step back rather than hover. Being her grandmother has taught me something I never fully grasped as a mother. Love does not need control to survive. It needs honesty and consistency. We talk more, we listen better. Our home is not perfect, but it is safe, and that has made all the difference. I think about Rachel sometimes, not with anger, but with a sober understanding of who she is and who she may never become. I do not excuse her choices, and I no longer try to rewrite them into something softer. I have learned that compassion does not require self-erasure. You can care and still refuse to be harmed. You can hope for change without sacrificing your stability while you wait. The hardest lesson was also the most necessary one. Love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. For years, I believed that giving endlessly made me a good mother. What I understand now is that it only made me invisible. Boundaries did not break my family apart. They revealed what was already broken and allowed something healthier to take its place. I share this not as a warning, but as an invitation to anyone who recognizes themselves in these pages. Ask yourself what you are giving and what it is costing you. Ask whether peace is real or merely quiet, and know that it is never too late to choose yourself. That Christmas, I did not buy a car. I did not show up with a grand gesture or a check meant to smooth everything over. What I gave instead was the truth and the courage to stand by it. In losing one version of my life, I gained another. And that, I have learned, was the greatest gift I could have given us both. What remains after everything falls quiet is not victory, but understanding. This story is not about punishment or reward. It is about the moment someone realizes that love cannot survive without dignity, and that giving endlessly is not the same as caring wisely. Boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are lines that protect what is still alive inside us. When truth is finally faced, peace does not arrive loudly. It settles in slowly, replacing fear with clarity and confusion with purpose. Sometimes the bravest act is not holding on, but letting go of what harms us, even when it wears the name of family. Growth often begins where guilt ends, and healing starts the moment we choose self-respect over silence. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Follow and subscribe for more stories like this. And thank you for being part of this community.